Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar, the top tips for developing a work breakdown structure. This is the 5th webinar in our lunchtime lightbulb series. We're now halfway through this first series and we're so pleased to have you along. You might have noticed this particular webinar is more related to project management and is a popular project management topic, but HR professionals will be experiencing more and more project work now and in the future, so this will be a very handy little topic for everyone. It's especially useful if you are new to projects and the work breakdown structure. We have some newcomers this week who haven't joined us before. Welcome, we're so pleased to have you along, and we obviously have some of our weekly attendees. It's great to see you back again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Sibel, and I'll be joined as usual today by Michael Meir, Director and Lecturer here at Cal. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, everybody.
Now, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items to run through very quickly. This webinar will run for approximately 30 or 40 minutes, depending on your questions. I will open up the second half to your questions, so if at any time during Michael's presentation, during the next 20 or so minutes, you do have a question that you would like to ask, please jot it down in your questions tab on your dashboard there. Down towards the bottom of your dashboard you'll see a questions tab. Type them in there so that I can read them out and have Michael answer them for everybody to hear. This webinar and the presentation will also be available for you this afternoon. I will send you the link to our brand new Cal YouTube channel, which is very exciting, as well as the PowerPoint slides that you can keep. So here's what I understand, Michael. Technically, the work breakdown structure, or the WBS as it's often shortened to, refers to a portion of a total project management plan that is used by the project management team to organise a project into manageable objectives and to create a blueprint by which the steps leading to the completion of a project are obtained. In very simple terms, the work breakdown structure can be thought of as an outline or map of the project, and like an outline, it becomes more detailed under each subheading or work package. Your entire project is defined by the work breakdown structure, with the work packages fitting together at the completion of the project to complete the whole, which means it's got to be right. Developing the work breakdown structure is critical to project success and is an essential first step in the project planning phase. The WBS relates to scope definition in that it helps characterize the total scope of the project, leading to a successful end product. It also helps to verify a common team understanding during project management, and, Michael, that's why we're here, so that we can learn how to do it properly. Take a breath. How's that sound?
Well, sure. Look, I think we can go home now. You've summed it all up. Thank you all for coming. I don't know that we can add a lot more now.
All right, that's silly, Michael. What are we going to run through today?
All right. Well, today we'll cover off, and look, we have to bear in mind that we've only got a half an hour, and this is a big topic. So what is a work breakdown structure? When should we develop one? How to develop one? How to use it? And, of course, your questions answered.
Excellent. As always, Michael, you've given us a very full agenda, but I am going to take a couple of seconds here to run a quick poll, so do bear with me. You will see on your screen in just a couple of seconds the question: have you ever used a WBS in your current or previous role? With the answers yes, no, I've never been in a position to, no, but I think we should have. So when you're ready, just pop in the most appropriate answer for you, and we can let Michael know who we've got in the room today. Almost everybody has voted. Just give a couple more seconds here. All right, that's about everybody. And a bit of a mix. We've got never been in a position to. We've got 25% of people are saying yes. And we've, interestingly enough, got about 20% of people saying no, but I think we should have, which is very interesting for you, Michael. And a few people have also said no. We're almost there. So we've got a lot of people who've never done one before, Michael, which will be interesting for you. You better make this an interesting webinar for them so that they feel inspired to go and create their own work breakdown structure. All right, thank you, everybody. Just close this. Excellent. So let's get started, Michael. Let us go through now what is the work breakdown structure.
Sarah, the 15% who thought they should have used one is actually fairly accurate. But sadly, as people will know, many projects get underway on a hope and a prayer rather than a lot of detailed planning up front. But now, what does a work breakdown structure do? As you've suggested very rightly, it shows what's to be done in a project. In fact, the WBS really is the project's to-do list. It lists the project outputs and their associated activities and tasks, and they're usually depicted in a hierarchical breakdown form to show what's to be done. It takes each output or deliverable and shows them in sequence from general to specific, and it shows tasks and activities required to produce the outcomes that a project is there to achieve, and it tends to show them in sequence. Now, I think we've got coming up here we are. Here's the famous Hux worked out breakdown structure, and you can see how the tasks or the higher order tasks, the planning, design equipment building, etc. These deliverables or outputs are then broken down into associated activities. The tasks underneath them would be developed for each activity. It sets out the scope of the work required to produce the project. Very importantly, it shows what's in and can, very importantly, to show what's not in. And that's a very important data. Look, we'll come back to that Hux diagram in a minute or so, but for the moment, let's get on with the basics of preparing the WBS.
So, Michael, you've put up here that the WBS can often be like the project recipe, which is a nice way to think about it. Before we get into the proper details of how, perhaps we could quickly explain why do we need the work breakdown structure in the first place, Michael?
Sarah, there's, again, a lovely old adage. Failing to plan is planning to fail. And very much the work breakdown structure is a vital part of that planning. Crucially, it's important to start the plan, but also it's very, very important really to spend the time to get it right. We have to avoid the pressure just to get started. That's sowing the seeds of disaster. Now, a WBS is to develop, and I'll just go through a recipe here for you if I can. It defines what needs to be done in the project and the order in which the activities and their tasks should be completed. It determines what resources are required, when they'll be required, or in project terminology, allocated. It defines tasks that can be delegated and the skill sets required to complete them. The work breakdown structure is also a key document to be shared amongst the people who are involved in the execution of a project so it can confirm a common understanding of the scope of work across the whole project. It helps identify project milestones. It helps us prepare a Gantt chart. It assists in budget estimation. And finally, it also helps identify project risks by identifying areas of uncertainty. Also, it's a very useful document to present to sponsors and steering committees to clarify planning estimates and work required.
Well, all of that information in such a tiny little document, obviously it's quite powerful. Now, Michael, from my very limited project management experience, I do know that the order of steps and the documents is very important. So when should a WBS be developed?
Sarah, usually right at the start, early as possible if you can. Right at that concept, very early planning, the initial phase in there. However, it can be created at any time throughout the project, particularly when outputs need clarification, and of course it can be further developed and refined during the planning process itself. Now, before you start to develop a work breakdown structure, of course, look, you really need to have a very clear understanding and outline of the project and its intended outcomes. Hopefully you'll get this from a project brief or charter, and with this then you can list down the project deliverables. You'll also need a very well developed and profound understanding of the project and what it's supposed to achieve. It also helps if you have some knowledge and experience in project management processes and methods. But in reality, like a recipe, anyone with a logical mindset can put together a simple work breakdown structure by following the steps that we'll run through now.
Excellent. Michael, we will get into the nitty-gritty now and look at the steps in developing the work breakdown structure. I hope everybody has their pens and paper ready.
A work breakdown structure can be created any way you like, through listing, then grouping and then sequencing outputs, the project activities and tasks required to successfully deliver a project. It can involve a lot of people depending on the level of detail required. Seldom is it a one-person job. Often a work breakdown structure develop what's called a top-down technique, starting with the project outcomes, those higher order tasks, deliverables, and then breaking these down into activities that need to be completed in order to produce each output. And then these activities are then broken down and sequenced into smaller specific tasks and sequence. So let's have a look at the planning levels. There's that higher level, level 1, the higher order tasks, the output tasks. Level 2, which are the activity tasks, and level 2 lists the activities, and then level 3 lists the tasks and activities to achieve the activities. I stumbled over that, Miss Sarah. Now,
well, Michael, if you're confused, imagine how I feel.
No, I'm not confused. I just stumbled. As I mentioned earlier, look, the development of a work breakdown structure can be quite labour intensive, but best results are often included when we assemble a good project team, as well as our subject matter experts, people with experience in previous projects, and people with experience in delivering similar types of deliverables themselves. One of the most effective and efficient ways of getting a work breakdown on structure on paper is to use brainstorming techniques where everybody in the room contributes their ideas. As a first step, you get participants to look at all the outputs and generate the outputs, activities, tasks that they can think of. Then record them all on a whiteboard or electronically if you're doing this remotely. It's the process of ideas generation that very often triggers new ideas, and with a broad and disparate group you can be reasonably sure that you're going to get a full complement of ideas of all the tasks and activities on the project. Now, to do this work, it's important that you let it run without interruption. So the first idea is to get all the ideas on the board. Then, once the initial brainstorming is exhausted, then you can start to organise them. Not before, into their various groups and activities.
Yes, I'm sure we've all been involved in brainstorming. And the other day I was involved in a session with a group online. It was quite a large group actually. And we used a brainstorming tool that made it really very easy. But what about when you have a smaller group or it's really just you? I'm sure that many of our participants today are struggling to get started with their first work breakdown structure and are finding it hard to even identify that first line of outputs. Can you suggest a way to make this easier for them, Michael?
Sarah, another useful approach for a small team, or if you're doing it by yourself, is to use mind mapping software and or basic common or garden sticky notes. Good place to start. Now, for this technique, you need to write down each task on a separate note or brainstorm with the project team to find out the outputs, activities and tasks, etc. needed to complete it. Then you you post these notes, or even pen and paper. You can move your ideas around. You can put them on a whiteboard and move them around. You start to list your ideas, and then in turn they'll give you new ideas so that they can generate a whole lot of new lines of thought that you might otherwise not have thought about. Mind mapping software is terrific as a tool to help you here. So just keep going until you've identified the key activities and outputs. Then you can start to identify the tasks and activities involved. You write these on the sticky notes and place them around each output. Now, it's important to note that tasks and their lists will vary in size. What's important first up is you start to work around them, building like a fishbone the various activities that are involved in all of those in their logical groupings and logical sequence. Then that technique starts to make a lot of sense. So try to break them down into 2 levels, larger activities and their associated smaller tasks, and move the notes around and keep adding more until a structure emerges. Then you can start to break down each output into sequential smaller units of work and activities, and these are all the things that needed to get done in order to produce the output. Then you can sequence them by the order in which they need to be started. At this activity level, it's quite common that there are 5 to 7 activities for each output. Each output is then broken down sequentially into smaller packages or tasks required to perform the activity. This is known as the task level. Now, once you've worked them out, the outputs and activities then can be broken up into work packages, and then these can be entered into the work breakdown structures. There are a number of ways and different ways that you can, of course, display your work breakdown structure. Some project managers use lists and tables, whilst others use a tree structure or outline, as you can start to see here. Outlining is one of the easiest ways of representing a work breakdown structure. However, most people really use a hierarchical structure or diagram. Look, once you've had your initial run through with the work breakdown structure, you need to go back then and review the list to check that all the activities and tasks seem appropriately grouped in terms of their complexity. For example, a task might be so complex that it needs to be considered an activity in its own right. Look, this is a judgment call. There's no real formula for determining at what level a unit of work should sit.
Okay, Michael, that's all very well. I think I'm starting to get it now, but perhaps we could walk through an example so I can see exactly how it works.
Sarah, many of people today will be doing project management online, so they might be well familiar with the HUX case study that we showed you one format of it briefly at the start of the webinar. Now, for those of you who haven't seen HUX case study, the case study is HUX Building for the Future. Now, let me give you a brief overview of it. HUX is a woodworking plant on the outskirts of a major city. The business is doing very well and it needs to expand its manufacturing capability, and to do so they want to construct a newly air-conditioned plant extension beside the existing plant. Now, the new extension includes the procurement and installation of dust-free plant paint and finishing shop, complete with an additional compressor. Part of this project will also include the procurement and installation of an AutoCAD woodworking production train, including the computer hardware and purpose-designed software required to run it. So, if we looked at the physical deliverables or physical outcomes that have got to be achieved, the construction of the new extension, the procurement and installation of a dust-free plant and finishing shop with the associated compressor, the procurement and installation of an AutoCAD woodworking production chain, including the computer hardware, procurement and installation of plant air conditioning, and the development of software for the AutoCAD woodworking production train. Now, one way to commence a WBS is to use these 5 deliverables as the higher order level tasks or outputs, so that you can see them here. Across that top line, you can see there are those. These are things that have to be delivered in order to achieve the project outcome. Now, the next step under that is to add in all the tasks that you can see related in the next diagram. So we start to populate under each of the higher order tasks. Note that these are not necessarily complete, because remember, under here we still haven't broken down these activity packages into their associated and tasks and activities. So this 13 items that you can see there in terms of activities can be do have an associated possible 61 tasks associated with them.
So I can see that that's starting to make sense. So what you're saying is the end result would be the expansion of manufacturing, but in order to get there, you've got those 9 or 10 or 13 steps in order to get there, which seems to be making sense. This seems quite lengthy and detailed, Michael. You're saying this isn't even finished yet, and it's already almost running over our page. Is there another way to do this?
Yes, there is, Sarah, and it's commonly in a form of a matrix. So if we look at that, there it's set out literally as we would expect with a matrix. The higher order tasks are listed across the top, and then their associated activities are listed sequentially below them.
Okay, this is also making more sense. It's less pretty to look at, but I guess that's not the most important detail, I suppose.
Surprisingly, Sarah, in the execution of projects, prettiness isn't a priority.
Oh, come on, it definitely should be. So, Michael, is there another way that you can show the WBS?
Look, Sarah, there's an infinite variety of it, and here's another one. This is the same thing, but it's looked at again, different form of it. It's in its higher order tasks. It's that you'll see up there. It's really gone through the activities that are required to deliver the project. So we see up the top, it's running through right through from the planning stage in there to the project closure, and it's taken it from start right through till the end, following a little bit of the implementation side of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine. I can definitely see how that works. But how do I know how to determine the size of each activity? I mean, this can get quite confusing. I can either end up with way too much detail or not enough detail. How do I know?
Oh, $64 question there, sir. And look, frankly, it's one that project managers very frequently struggle with. When deciding how specific and or detailed to make your work packages, remember you must be a bit careful not to go into too much detail, as this frankly can lead to you end up micromanaging the thing, and this can slow the process down. On the other hand, work packages whose details are too broad or too large become impossible for a project manager to really be on top of accurately. So a tool in here is decomposition. It's the act of breaking deliverables into successive smaller chunks of work to be completed in order to achieve a level of work that can be realistically managed by the manager and their project manager and their team, and completed within the given time frame by one or two of the team members involved. This level of breakdown and detail is called work packaging. They tend to be at the lower end of tasks. They're groups of similar tasks at similar levels in the project, and they're specifically assigned to a person or a team to be completed. They have a definite starting point, finishing point, their own budgets. They are required to be completed by the end of the project for it to be completed. Now, specifically, again, another $1 million question here, Sarah. You're running these past me. How small do these chunks of work need to be broken down to? Well, PMBOK seems to give doesn't seem to give a definitive answer on that, Most project managers, however, would agree that this varies by project, but it can be often measured using the 880 rule. The 880 rule is that no work package should be less than 8 hours or greater than 80.
Well, that's really starting to make sense. So that's giving a really definitive kind of, 8 hours, an 80-hour rule, which is quite handy.
Sarah, we're moving through this, but I'm aware that it's taken a bit of time to get here. So here are some tips that I'd really like to share with you. First off, we have to prepare the list of tasks and activities. Now, to do this, we really need to see that the completion of each task or activities will result in the completion of an activity above it. We need to check that the completion of each group of activities will result in the completion of the output above. For example, finishing all the tasks and activities that belong to the output will mean that the output itself will be completed. And we might have to move some of these around as necessary. Finally, give each item on the list a unique identifier to be used as a reference, and this is also very important for budgeting. Activities and tasks should be written also in the present tense using action verbs, for example, assemble team, develop model, sign lease. So to sum it up, when creating a work breakdown structure, it's important to consider these factors: the complexity of the project, the level of information captured by the charter and hopefully the detail, including what's in and what's out, the accuracy of the budget estimates, how precise do they have to be, what order of magnitude are they, is it plus or minus, the extent of quality definitions and quality requirements of the scope, the amount of management, supervision and or autonomy that's required to execute the task, the degree of risk involved in the project tasks, and the risk profile of interested stakeholders, the extent of any contractual performance obligations, the required levels of management and control, and of course the level of the prescriptive detail required.
Excellent, Michael. I'm also aware of time and we are about to open the floor up to questions, so if you've jotted something down, do make sure you pop it in your questions tab. But Michael, now that we've developed it and we know how to develop it, how do we use the work breakdown structure?
Aha, Miss Sarah, now down to the real stake of all of this. Okay, look, resource allocation. It can be used to determine the resources, time, money, materials, people, etc., required for each activity and task. From here you then can start to develop your budget. Because a WBS requires you and your project team to account for everything you'll be creating, you can start to create a very accurate cost estimates of what you'll need to required in completing the project. This process of building the budget from scratch is often called bottom-up budgeting. It's often important to factor in or include, and I might say here it's important to remember this, factor in and include provision for management expenses or above-the-line expenses, including the managerial cost of overseeing and supporting the project. As a guide, above-the-line costs might be added at up to 15% of the project team's time. It's also very advisable to include an allowance for contingencies. A good guide is around 10%, but frankly that varies according to the complexity of the project and marketplace conditions.
Well, excellent. Take a breath, Michael, because I'm about to ask you some questions as we move into the final phase here and we open the floor up to you. Simple one to start with, Michael. Does every project need a WBS?
Sarah, I would say yes, and my reason for that is I'll go right back. Failing to plan is very equivalent to planning to fail. Even with a recipe, no matter how good you are as a master chef, you still need to have very good grounding in what you want to do and a process to do it. So I'd suggest yes, a very well required task.
Okay, the next question is it okay to allocate hours and cost beside your WBS? And secondly, how important is it to stick to the 880 rule?
Two parts to that question. Yes, very much you can allocate both time, resources and completion rates, etc. In your WBS, but you're probably going to do that in your Gantt chart. Is an easier place to manage it. Now the second one, the 880 rule, look, it's not mandatory, it's a guide, it's a practice guide. So again, you have to make a judgment call according to the complexity of the project and complexity of the task involved.
Okay, excellent. The next question here is, how many levels should I aim for in my WBS?
Well, it depends on complexity, Sarah, but again, look, a 5 to 7 in terms of outputs, and in there they will have associated tasks with them. So once you start to get broader than that, you need to break it up into other chunks. It becomes a bit unmanageable there. Certainly if you're doing the desal plant, however, you've got a very complex project there.
Excellent. And can I use the WBS as my schedule?
Your WBS is a very important tool in determining your schedule, because from your WBS you'll work out how much time, that's duration, and how much effort, the resources, that you need to do it. And you'll need to factor those in when you're doing your Gantt chart. So it's a very, very useful tool to have.
And we have one more here. I have noticed that MS Project puts the WBS in the column beside the Gantt chart. Is this how it should be presented?
Well, a Gantt chart done by Mr. Gantt, by the way. No, he was a real man. I think his name was Henry Lawrence Gantt. There, miscellaneous information. Gantt chart, the horizontal line sets out time. The vertical line sets out the tasks and activities in sequence. And that vertical line is, of course, derived from your work breakdown structure.
Excellent. So that just about wraps it up. And Luke has just asked if he can get a copy of the webinar because he's getting a lot of interference. Huge apologies there, Luke, if that's anything to do with us. Yes, you will get a copy of the webinar. We'll send you the link to the YouTube channel, and also I'll send you the presentation so that you can keep it. So that's about it for today. Thanks, Michael. You've taken us through lots of information there. So as I said, you'll have this to keep, which will be a great resource for you. If you have any topics, ideas, issues, or anything at all that you would like us to turn into a webinar, we love your suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. Our contact details are up on the screen now. You can have a look at our website, email us through, call us on the phone, or you can like us on Facebook. There's always a bit of information, a bit of action going on there. So thanks for today, Michael, and thanks to those of you who joined us. Thanks for those of you who came back again, and to those of you who this is your first time. I do hope you've enjoyed the 5th of our 10 Lunchtime Lightbulb Series webinar, and that you do now have a better understanding of how important the work breakdown structure is, and that you also you have a better understanding now of how to create and use one. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. We'll see you next week.